that it was going to. I thought it was going to be harder for the Dodgers to win, given the media coverage, stress, tension, whatever you want to call it, on the players. So I will tell you that I cannot make sense of why they are playing as well as they are right now, given that they are definitely under a tremendous amount of scrutiny right now. So that is the only thing I can say about that. All right. I know Jeff is on the line, so we're gonna get started. I mean, I get texts like every moment about voting for all-star ballots and stuff like that, but I can only tell you, it's definitely weird. All right, so we're gonna get started, and where we were last week, I mentioned that the Midrash on Leviticus kind of departs in the sense that last week we were reading about Eleazar and Itamar taking over after their brothers Nadav and Avihu are burned up after again what we read about in Leviticus chapter 10, and then it kind of jumps to Numbers. And we will jump back to Leviticus, but they kind of, at least in this collection of midrash that is in the gifts of the in the Legends of the Jews, we go to this section about the gifts of the princes, which is from Numbers chapter 7. It's from Parshat Naso, and so we read this portion just a couple of weeks ago. I shouldn't say just a couple of weeks ago. When we began Numbers, we read this portion, second portion, Torah portion in the book of Numbers. And so the way this collection has it is that's where we go. We go right from Leviticus to Numbers. Now, again, we will jump back to read one more narrative, which I can understand why Ginsburg put in the order that he did. But what's interesting about this is that in the book of Numbers, we have this story about what happens with the dedication of the tabernacle, of the Mishkan. And so there does seem to be this feeling like this is the next thing that happens. And so there is a logic to this. And that is, again, let's put everything that happens with the Mishkan together. So this is, again, very long chapter. It's chapter 7 of Numbers. It's the longest chapter in the Torah. It's 87 verses. And it basically goes through what each of the different tribes brings to the Mishkan, or specifically the head of each tribe brings to the Mishkan. And I'm laughing because when we read this in the Torah, you know what, I'm going to share it real quick. When we read this in the Torah, it is a part of the Torah that we read. I mean, Mike, you were there. I don't think Mike and Mary, you were there. I don't think anybody who's with us this morning was online, unless, again, people who are with us on Facebook. We go through it pretty fast because it's a very repetitious part of the Torah. It is, we always read it. When we read it, we make sure we read it, but it is a very strange section in that it's very repetitious. The Midrash recognizes that it's repetitious. And I'm going to show it to you real quick so that you can see what I'm talking about. And so I'm going to share this up just for a quick sec. And then we're going to get into it, because the line from chapter 7 says, on the day that Moses finished setting up the tabernacle, He consecrated, he anointed and consecrated it with all its furnishings, as well as the altar and its utensils. When he anointed and consecrated the chieftains of Israel, the heads of the ancestral houses, namely the chieftains of the tribes, those who were in charge of Rome, drew near and brought their offering before the Lord. 6 draft carts and 12 oxen, a cart for every 2 chieftains, and an ox for each one, when they had brought before the tabernacle. The Lord said to Moses, accept these and use them for the tent of meeting, etc. And so it starts with here. Nachshon, the son of Aminadab, the son of the tribe of Judah. His offering 1 silver bowl weighing 130 shekels and 1 silver basin of 70 shekels by sanctuary weight, both filled with choice flour with oil mixed in for a meal offering. 1 gold ladle of 10 shekels filled with incense, 1 bull of the herd and 1 ram, and 1 lamb in its first year for a burnt offering, 1 goat for a sin offering, and for his sacrifice of well-being, 2 oxen, 5 ram, 5 he goats, and 5 yearling rams. That was the offering of Nachshon, son of Aminadab, on the second day. So I'm not going to read it all because the same thing, right? So just to see 130 shekels and here it is for Issachar, 130 shekels, 1 silver basin of 70 shekels, a sanctuary, etc. So it's every day, 12 tribes bringing the same thing. So the midrash on this essentially is everybody brings this. And here's what it says about, so what do we learn from that? So when Moses called on the people to make their offerings for the erection of the sanctuary, it solely vexed the princes of the tribes that he had not summoned them particularly. Hence, they withheld their contributions, waiting for the people to give according to the powers, so that they might step in and make up the deficiency. And all should observe that without them, the tabernacle should not have been completed. So the heads of each tribe say, you know what? Let's sit back and watch to see what everybody brings. When they don't bring their enough stuff, we'll bring our stuff, and then everyone will see how important we are. But they were mistaken, for in their ready devotion, the people provided all needful things for the sanctuary. And when the princes of the tribes perceived their mistake and brought their contributions, it was too late. All that they could do was to provide the jewels for the robes of the high priests, but they can no longer take a hand in the erection of the tabernacle. On the day of the dedication, they tried to make a partial amends for letting slip their opportunity by following the advice of the tribe of Issachar, renowned for wisdom and erudition, to bring wagons for the transportation of the tabernacle. These princes of the tribes were no upstarts or men newly risen to honor. They were men who even in Egypt had been in office and exposed to the anger of the Egyptians, for they had also stood at Moses' side when he undertook the census of the people. They now brought as an offering to Moses 6 covered wagons fully equipped and even painted blue, the color of the sky, and also 12 oxen to draw the wagons. So the heads of the tribes should have known better. They did know better. They'd been well known from back to the time of Egypt. Back in Egypt, these guys were already men of renown. And so Issachar, which is, of course, the second tribe we have, not a tribe that you'd expect, they seem to know what's going on. And so they bring wagons for transporting stuff for the Mishkan. And so from this, we learn that the tribes learn what they were. Well, the princes of the tribes, the heads of the other tribes, understand now what they can do, which is they missed an opportunity to get the Mishkan finished, but they can bring these wagons. And it says that they brought the wagons, fully equipped, even painted blue, kind of the Jewish color, and also the ox to draw the wagons. And as we said, there are six of them. with 12 oxen for each one. So let's read why the six. What is it? What is the significance of this? So it says the 6 wagons correspond to the 6 days of creation, to the 6 mothers, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, Bilhah, and Zilpah, to the 6 laws that the Torah prescribes exclusively for the king, to the 6 orders of the Mishnah, and to the 6 heavens. So these are all 6s that we have in tradition. I was going to say in the Torah, but really in tradition. Because this idea of the 6 heavens, we actually have 7 heavens, but 6 heavens or 7 heavens is definitely a midrashic derivation. 6 days of creation, you're like, well, there's 7 days of creation. Well, there's 6 days of creation and there's the day of Shabbat. So there's drawing out 6 is not so obvious. 7 is a very symbolic number, but there are 6s, 6 orders of the Mishnah, 6 sections of the Mishnah. Zraim, Moed, Nezikim, Nashim. Kedoshim and Taharot. Those are the 6 sections of the Mishnah. 6 special laws for the kings. These are, again, not the most obvious things, but there are 6s in Jewish tradition. So 6 wagons is significant. The number of the oxen, 12, right, corresponded to the 12 constellations and the 12 tribes. So 12 is a couple big 12s. The zodiac months, if you will, and 12 tribes. And it says Moses did not at first want to accept the teams, but God not only bade him accept them, he also ordered him to address the princes kindly and to thank them for their gifts. Moses now even thought that the Shekhinah had deserted him and would rest on the princes of the tribes, assuming that they had received direct communication from God to make this offering to the sanctuary. But God said to Moses, if it had been a direct command from me, then I should have ordered you to tell them. But they did this on their own initiative, which indeed meets with my wish. So Moses now accepted the gifts, not without misgivings, fearing lest a wagon should break or an ox die, leaving the tribe or that unrepresented by a gift. But God assured him that no accident should occur to either wagon or ox. Yes, a great miracle came to pass in regard to these wagons and oxen, for the animals live forever without ailing or growing old, and the wagons likewise endure to all eternity. So the Midrash here derives from this. Look, the tribes weren't told to do this. And so if they had been, it would have been a specified gift, and Moses would have known that it was legitimate, commanded. Everything would have been okay. But he didn't. And to some extent, the Midrash tells us that Moses is a little jealous of these gifts. And even more so, Moses is a little bit concerned that these gifts are going to be a problem, because unlike the other things that are given by the people to the Mishkan, to the tabernacle, the curtains, the poles, the gold, the jewels, these are animals. They could die. So how do you give something that maybe won't be, maybe not last long? They may, because they're animals, they could get sick, they could die. And so the Midrash says that actually these animals miraculously don't get old, they don't get sick, they don't get injured. And even the wagons won't ever go bad. They won't break. And so there is a sense that these gifts that each tribe gives, or the princes of each tribe, they're a problem because they're not like the other things that the people have brought for the Mishkan. So the Midrash here is that it's okay. These things will last too. So it tells us next that Moses then distributed the wagons among the Levites. So the division of the sons of Gershon received 2 wagons with the transportation of the heavy portions of the tabernacle, boards, bars, and similar things, whereas the former, having the lighter portions, had enough with 2 wagons. The third division of the Levites, the sons of Kohat, had received no wagons, for they were entrusted with the transportation of the Holy Ark, which might not be lifted on a wagon, but was to be borne on their shoulders. So what it tells us is, again, is of the 3 Levite tribes, there was 3 Levite tribes: the Gershonites, the Merarites, the Kohathites. Each of those 3 divisions of the Levites would have had 2 wagons each. But the problem is that the Kohathites, the ones who actually carry the ark, they're not supposed to put that on a wagon. They're supposed to carry it. So they don't need it. They don't need it. They don't need the two. So 6 wagons, 3 divisions of Levites, 2 for each one. But the ones with the Kohathites, so again, the first team of Levites, they carry the curtains, the accoutrements of the Mishkan that are not the Holy of Holies type of things, the stuff that goes, again, the holiest stuff that nobody puts on a cart. The next group takes the boards. The Merarites takes the boards and the planks and the wood, if you will, the foundation parts, the wood parts. But then what would happen to this group, right? This third division. Because they weren't supposed to put that on a wagon. And it says, David, who forgot to observe this law and had the ark lifted upon a wagon, paid heavily for his negligence. For the priests who tried to carry the ark to the wagon were flung down upon the ground. Achitophel then called David's attention to the need of following the example of Kohat's sons who bore the ark on their shoulders to the desert. And David ordered them to do the same. And so again, we have the story of when David brings in the ark into Jerusalem, that they put it on a cart and it starts falling off the cart and people have to run up and grab it and they die. I mean, this one guy, Uzzah, dies when he touches it. So you're not supposed to be putting it on a cart. So David learned the hard way that you're not supposed to put it on a cart. You're supposed to carry it on the poles. But the princes of their tribes were not content with having provided the means for transporting the sanctuary. They wanted to be the first on the day of dedication to present offerings. As with the wagons, Moses was doubtful whether or not to permit them their offerings. For these were of an unusual kind that were not ordinarily permissible. But God bade him accept the dedication offerings of the princes. But Moses was still in doubt whether to let all 12 princes make their offerings on the same day or let a special day for each, set up a special day for each. And if so, in what order should they make their offerings? God thereupon revealed to him that each of the princes of the tribes was to sacrifice on a special day, and that Nachshon, the prince of Judah, was to make the start. He was rewarded in this way for the devotion he had shown God during the passage to the Red Sea. When Israel, beset by the Egyptians, reached the sea, the tribes among themselves started quarreling who should go first into the sea. Then suddenly Nachshon, the prince of Judah, plunged into the sea, firmly trusting that God would stand by Israel in their need. And so from this, we learn, of course, that Nachshon, the prince of Judah, of the tribe of Judah, the head of the tribe of Judah, because of his belief in God and his faith at the Sea of Reeds, at the Red Sea, earned the right to give his gift first. And so now we're going to get into what the gifts were, which we heard about the wagons, we heard about the ox. And now we're going to read about that other gift that came along with each of the tribes, or the heads of each of the tribes. So again, everybody gave what they wanted to give to the Mishkan. Everybody gave something. Well, so everybody gave. Anybody who wanted to give gave something. Whether they were rich or poor, they all brought something. The princes, the heads of the tribes, as they're calling them princes, the heads of the tribes, they give something in the book of Numbers, but they didn't give anything special during Leviticus, during Exodus. We read about this gift in Numbers. So let's read what they give, which again is each of the tribes. Nachshon's offering was 1 silver, its charger, that had been fashioned for the sanctuary work, for the sanctuary. The weight whereof was 130 shekels, 1 bowl of equal size, but of lighter weight of 70 shekels, both of them full of fine flour mingled with oil for a meat offering, which is again what we read in Numbers chapter 7. Furthermore, 1 spoon of 10 shekels of gold full of incense, 1 young bullock picked the herd, 1 excellent ram, and 1 lamb a year old. These 3 were burnt for burnt offering, and a kid of the goats for a sin offering to atone for possible uncleanness in the sanctuary. These sacrifices and gifts Nachshon offered out of his own possession, not out of the tribe. God's acceptance of the offerings of the princes of the tribe show how dear they were to God. For at no other time was an individual allowed to offer up incense as Nachshon and his fellows did. They also brought sin offerings, which is ordinarily not permitted unless one is conscious of having committed a sin. Finally, the prince of the tribe of Ephraim brought his offering on the 7th day of the dedication, which was on Shabbat. Though ordinarily none but the sacrificed may be offered on Shabbat. So again, if you go through what each tribe gives, we get to the 7th day. It's the tribe of Ephraim, which also is significant because, again, Shabbat offering is a special offering. So what it's telling us is that the tribes are offering up a special offering. They're offering up a sin offering, which isn't specifically for any sin, which is not the way sin offerings are normally done, right? They're normally done after someone knows that they've done something wrong, not offered up on behalf of a tribe. And they're also offering up, it seems, incense, which is not what anyone other than the Levites and the priests do. So this is a very special thing. So the Midrash essentially is that this was a special and one and only time that this was done. And now, as the Midrash points out, the offering of all the princes of the tribes were identical. So the repetition, it's repetition. It's repetition. But they had a different significance for each tribe. Each tribe was different. From the time of Jacob, who foretold it to them, every tribe knew his future history to the time of the Messiah. Hence, at the dedication, every prince brought offerings as symbolized the history of his tribe. And so what it tells us is that each one of the offerings, even though they were the same offerings, that silver bowl and the ladle and everything else for each tribe was significant and was connected to each of the tribes. And so what we have now is the Midrash on what the tribes learned or meant, or how each of these, the same offerings for each of the tribes that lays it out in Numbers chapter 7 is actually significant and unique for each of the tribes. So now we have essentially a midrash on the tribes, because this was all the same, but yet it was significant for each one. So we start, and again, as we started as the first tribe, Nachshon, Judah. So that's what we're going to do for the next few minutes. We're going to look at each tribe. So Nachshon, the prince of Judah, brought a silver charger and a silver bowl, the one to stand for the sea, the other for the mainland, indicating that out of his tribe would spring such men as Solomon and the Messiah, who would rule over all the world, both land and sea. The golden spoon of 10 shekels signified the 10 generations from Peretz, the son of Judah, to David, the first of the Judean kings, all whose actions were sweet as the incense contained in the spoon. The 3 burnt offerings, the bull, the ram, and the lamb, correspond to the 3 patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whereas the kid of the goats was to atone for the sin of Judah, who sought to deceive his father with the blood of a kid. The 2 oxen of the peace offering pointed to David and Solomon, and the 3 small cattle of the peace offering, the ram, the goats, and the lamb, correspond to the descendants and successor of these 2 Judean kings, who may also be classified in 3 groups: the very pious, the very wicked, and those who are neither pious nor wicked. And so, obviously, Judah was a very important tribe. It was the tribe of King David and then his son Solomon. And so, why did they go first? Or, probably because everybody knew the Judeans were a very powerful tribe. But of course, from this, we also get that because we have it at the very beginning, it also represents some special things that we know about the tribe of Judah up till that point, which, again, thousands of years ago, people are still waiting for one of the descendants of King David to be the Messiah. But we know that, again, that there's 10 generations from Peretz, Judah's son, through Tamar to King David. I mean, you can make the argument, shouldn't it be 10 generations from Judah to David? Well, it's close. It's 10 generations plus that one. By the way, just so you understand, this idea of the generations of Judah, it's significant in the Torah. It's also significant in the Christian Bible. Really significant in the Christian Bible. And so the fact that we have a midrash that tells us that these generations are important, I will show you that this is important to Christians in the Christian Bible. So I'm going to just show you what I'm talking about here. I mean, one can make the argument that it becomes a it becomes a little bit significant in the Christian Bible because they actually will trace the generations into, I'm going to show you right now. In the book of Matthew, in the Christian Bible, the first gospel, they do something really interesting, which is that they have if they're willing to see, Matthew's genealogy is considered more complex than Luke's. It's overtly schematic, organized in 3 sets of 14. The first is from Abraham to David. Then you have David to Jeconiah, which is basically the destruction of the temple. And then the last section from Jeconiah to Jesus. So you have three sets of 14 generations that go from Abraham all the way to Jesus. So if you notice, this is Wikipedia. This is not me saying this. The total of 42 generations is achieved only by omitting several names. So the choice of 3 sets of 14 seems deliberate. Various explanations have been suggested. 14 is twice 7, symbolizing perfection and covenant, and is also in the gematria the numerical value of the name David. So if you add up Daled Vav Daled, it comes out to 14. So when it says that there's names that are not mentioned, if you go from here to there, there are names of kings that we have in the Bible that aren't there. They literally just didn't include them, which means that somebody, or Matthew, let's assume, the gospel writer, essentially took liberties with the genealogies in the Bible so that you could have this structure of 14, 14, and 14. So it was definitely an issue in the Midrash. I'd argue it's also an interesting Midrash, if you will, in the Christian Gospels to get to to get through these numbers, which again in this case it's the generations, at least from Peretz to King David. So again, we have this tradition that people can kind of be classified into 3 groups: the pious, the wicked, and they kind of in between. And especially for the kings of Judah, the descendants of David and Solomon, they kind of specifically, again, some of them were good, some of them were bad, some were just kind of in between. So that is the first tribe, the tribe of Judah. Now, we started with Judah. We know why. Judah is the tribe of the king, and you can understand why its tribe would come first, even though Judah is the 4th oldest son of Jacob. And you'd think maybe then, okay, so fine. So then we go back to Reuben. And so here's what the Midrash is. On the second, well, could be anybody actually. Once you've gone to the 4th child, you could have Joseph. The Joseph tribes coming later, the Ephraim and Manassites, the Benjaminites. I mean, it could be anybody actually. But it says, on the second day of the dedication appeared the prince of the tribe of Reuben and wanted to present his offering, saying, "It is enough that Judah was permitted to offer sacrifice before me. Surely it is not time for our tribe to present our offering." I mean, or it should be, is it not time? But Moses informed him that God had ordained the tribe should present offerings in the order in which they moved through the desert, so that the tribe of Issachar followed Judah. This tribe had altogether good claims to be among the first to offer sacrifices, for in the first place, this tribe devoted itself completely to the study of Torah, so that the great scholars in Israel were among them. And then two, it was this tribe that proposed to the others the bringing of the dedication of the offerings. As this was a tribe of erudition, its gifts symbolized things appertaining to the Torah. So Issachar comes next. And so the Midrash is explaining why Issachar gets to come next. And the answer is that rather than do it by seniority, they did it by who was a part of which group. And remember, there are four groups of three tribes to each of the four groups. And that's the way they're organized around the Mishkan, the way they're organized around the tabernacle. Each quadrant is three tribes. And so Issachar gets put into that tribe of that quadrant of Judah, which, again, the tribes are broken up roughly to the same size. Each of the four quadrants are made up of three tribes that kind of come out to roughly the same tribe. And at least one of the things that we see in that is that there's a major large tribe that's kind of the leader of each of those quadrants. And so Issachar is part of the Judah quadrant. And moreover, it says that it was Issachar's idea to do this in the first place. And Issachar is traditionally a tribe that smart people, Torah scholars come from. Issachar is a tribe of scholars, a tribe of erudition. And so from this, again, we have this tradition that is perpetuated that Issachar, while not being a very important tribe necessarily in the lists or in the orders or in the recognition of the tribes, they're considered to be a very strong tribe of scholarship. And it says, the silver charger and the silver bowl corresponded to the written and to the oral Torah, and both vessels alike were filled with fine flour. For the two laws are not antagonistic, but form a unity and contain the loftiest of teachings. The fine flour is mingled with oil, just as knowledge of the Torah should be added to good deeds. For he who occupies himself with the Torah, who works good deeds and keeps himself aloof from sin, fills his creator with delight. The golden spoon of the 10 shekels symbolizes the two tables on which God with his palm wrote the 10 commandments, and which contain the commandments and all the particulars of the Torah, just as a spoon filled with incense. The three burnt offerings, the bull, the ram, and the lamb, correspond to the three groups of priests, the Levites, the Israelites, the priests, the Levites, and the Israelites. Whereas the kid of the goats alluded to the proselytes, for the Torah was revealed not only for Israel, but for all the world. And a proselyte who studies the Torah is no less than a high priest. The two oxen of the peace offering correspond to the oral and written Torah, the study of which brings peace on earth, peace in heaven. So, one can make the argument, this is the same for everybody. Not just Issachar, but for everybody. I mean, the two ox correspond to the oral and written Torah. Well, Issachar is a tribe of scholars, so that makes sense. But the three groups, the Levites, the priests, the Kohanim, the Levites, and the Israelites, I mean, that's for everybody. That every one of the tribes is essentially affirming that. So once they've given that for Issachar, essentially they can't use that again in this Midrash. But it's really interesting that, again, it shows how the rabbis, this Midrash actually shows what the rabbis felt about the Torah Shebaal Peh, the oral Torah that they studied and they promulgated, which they say is just as important as the Torah Shebichav, the written Torah. But both of them are not antagonistic. They don't work against each other. They're both needed. And even more so, whatever Torah you're studying, it's all Torah. It also has to be balanced with good deeds. Maasim Tovim, doing good deeds. You can't just study, you have to do good things. So, fine flour with oil mixed in is knowledge, the flour, with oil, good deeds. That goes for everybody, every tribe. But this is used for the tribe of Issachar. So now we've read about those two, Judah, Issachar. Let's get to the next tribe. After Nachshon, the temporal king, and Netanel, the spiritual king. So we've got Judah, led by Nachshon. Netanel, the tribe of Issachar, came the turn of Eliav, the prince of the tribe of Zvulun. This tribe owed its distinction to the circumstance that it followed commerce and through the profits thereof was enabled to maintain the tribe of Issachar, which entirely devoted to study could not support itself. The charger and bowl that he presented to the sanctuary symbolized food and drink which Zebulun provide the scholar tribe Issachar. The spoon indicated the border of the sea, which Jacob in his blessing bestowed to Zebulun as his possession, and the 10 shekels of its weight correspond to the 10 words of which this blessing consisted. The toe oxen point to the 2 blessings which Moses bestowed upon Zebulun. As the 3 small cattle, the ram, the goat, and the lamb, correspond to the 3 things which gave Zebulun's possession distinction before others. The tunny, the purple snail, and the white glass. Interesting. So we get to the tribe of Zebulun, which we know are the merchant tribe, the tribe of commerce, the tribe of sea traders. They make their money through trade. And what's interesting about this is that we don't know a lot about the tribe of Zebulun other than they are engaged in commerce. And along the coast, they are the tribe that has this responsibility of maintaining the financial commerce of the people. And in particular, according to this, the tribe of Issachar, who is their partner tribe, if you will. Whoa. So, what of course it's telling us here is that the job of people engaged in commerce is to support those engaged in Torah study. And so what you have in some families is a son that engages in Torah study who's supported by the son who is engaged in business. And the person who's engaged in business gets credit and gets accorded the study of his brother who's studying if he supports his brother. His brother's Torah is his Torah because he supports him. I mean, so the equivalent is that in some Jewish families right now, at this moment, there are children who are in charge of taking care of the family. And I usually say, and I say children because oftentimes it's more than one, whereas one child will do nothing but be the one that studies. Oftentimes it's the oldest one, but it's not necessarily the oldest one. It's whichever child seems to be most gifted at being a student and having the gifts, the intellectual gifts, to be a student, to be a student of Torah. And so this is a very old and still very prevalent attitude amongst those in the Orthodox world, that it's the job of some people to study and it's the job of others to support those who are studying. So that's why you can have some people engaged in the diamond business. As an example, it's not the only business. It's a huge part of the business in some of the Orthodox communities in America and in Europe and in Israel. And those people will have a sibling or two that are studying Torah. It's very much like this tradition of Zebulun. And again, the three things, the cattle, it's actually four things. Oh, three small cattle, the ram. Yeah, that's four things. The three things with Zebulun's possession has the tunny, the purple snail, and the white glass. So they're saying, again, in this midrash, they're saying not the bull, the other smaller offerings, the ram, the goat, and the lamb. Those correspond to the tunny, the purple snail, and the white glass, which are all things that happen on the coast. Fishing, the murex snail, which is where they or we derived the special purple dye that was used for originally for the talit fringe, the techelet color. And the other is this white glass, which is also one of the important things that was traded along the Mediterranean, is white glass, or what we call Roman glass, that was used throughout the Mediterranean. So this is what was traded in Zebulun's territory, which again, I say imagine to some extent, because white glass was not something that was traded from what we know during the biblical period, but was later on during the Midrashic period, very much so. White glass was definitely an important part of the trade. So that's the division or the group, the first quadrant of Judah. Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. Any questions or comments so far about these tribes? Anything? Anybody have any questions? Yes? No? Nobody? Well, again, I will again tell you that I was actually going to show you the division of the tribes. For those that were not part of our Torah study or don't know what I'm talking about, let me just share this up real quick. Yeah. There's the divisions. Judah, Issachar, Zebulun. And you can see the Reuben division, the Ephraim division, and the division of Dan. So you can see each division, each section was around the tabernacle. And the divisions of the three Levite groups, the Kohathites, the Gershonites, and the Merarites, are all around the tabernacle. Okay. So that is, and again, Moses and the Kohanim are the fourth division, if you will, around the tabernacle. But that's the tabernacle in the middle, and these are the tribes: east, north, west, south, or for that matter, east, south, west, and north, as we go around. So this is how this division, if you will, is reflected in what each of the tribes brings. Rosemary, you're there. Are you feeling like you'd like to read, or I love having you read, but
I can read if I turn my mute off.
so we did the first three tribes and what the significance of each of the tribes, even though they're all the same offerings, when they bring their stuff in Numbers chapter 7, there's a significance because each tribe has, again, same offering, but each one is interpreted differently. So first three, and now the next set.
After the tribes that belonged to Judah's camp division had brought their offerings, followed Reuben and the tribes belonging to his division. The gifts of the tribe of Reuben symbolized the events in the life of their forefather Reuben. The silver charger recalled Reuben's words when he saved Joseph's life, whom the other brothers wanted to kill, for the tongue of the just is as choice silver. The silver bowl, from which was sprinkled the sacrificial blood, recalled the same incident, for it was Reuben who advised his brothers to throw Joseph into the pit rather than to kill him. The spoon of 10 shekels of gold symbolized the deed of Reuben, who restrained Jacob's sons from bloodshed. Hence, the gold out of which the spoon was fashioned had a blood-red color. The spoon was filled with incense, and so too did Reuben fill his days with fasting and prayer until God forgave his sin with Bilhah, and his prayer was set forth before God as incense. As penance for this crime, Reuben offered the kid of goats as a sin offering, whereas the 2 oxen of the peace offering corresponded to the 2 great deeds of Reuben, the deliverance of Joseph and the long penance for his sin.
Yeah, we don't know a lot about Reuben as the oldest son of Jacob, but we do know 2 things. He tried to save his brother Joseph, and he also slept with his stepmother. It's pretty serious business. And so the rabbis derive from his offering that they're connected to those things. So that Reuben is, to some extent, he's the hero for both things, even though you'd think it's pretty bad what he did with his father. It's interesting that idea, though, of sleeping with your father's wife, not your mother, your stepmother, or in this case, concubine, is a very interesting motif in the Bible. Specifically, and I'm laughing because it seems a little bit more than coincidental that that's what happens with King David's own family. That when Adoniah, the king, heir apparent, what does he want to do when David dies? Is he wants to sleep with one of David's concubines. And Solomon, in his great wisdom, and through the egging on of his mother Bathsheba, decides to kill Adoniah for doing this, because it's seen as an act not only of affection, I guess, on the part of Reuben, or desire or lust, but it seems like a little bit of an act of saying that I'm really the one who should be the king. And so it seems as though the Reuben story actually is as much about King David and his family as it is about Reuben. I'm not saying that really is relevant here, other than the rabbis actually accord this as Reuben's act of penance and it's considered an indication of Reuben's um, acts of uh, of of penance, that he's actually considered to be admirable for it. In the time of King David, there's no admiration other there's just Adoniah gets killed for doing this, for sleeping with his, or for taking his father's concubines. I mean, Absalom does it too. I mean, he sleeps with David's concubines as an act of rebellion. So this is an important, statement of authority. And essentially, if you're the king who wants to be king, you got to get rid of your older brother if he's going to do these kind of things. And Reuben was the oldest brother, and he essentially gets relegated back because of what he does. And he doesn't die in the Bible, but he doesn't become the most important tribe, that's for sure. And so we have this midrash that, Reuben was good. He's the head of a division of the tribes, so the tribe must still be okay to some extent. But again, they're not the tribe in charge, and that's what we have. By the way, just to understand, this idea of the oldest son being the problem for the king who's not the oldest son when he takes power still exists. Saw an interesting documentary about the assassination of Kim Il-pak or Kim Jong-pak, whatever, the one who got killed at the airport in Kuala Lumpur. That again, he was the oldest son of Kim Jong-il, and his brother killed him because he was the older brother. And even though he had made a deal to be exiled, it wasn't enough. He had to be dead, and they killed him. They killed him with nerve toxin, nerve agent, so that he wouldn't be around to be a threat to the throne. So even if a king steps aside, doesn't always mean that they're not that they're gone. You essentially had that a little bit with Edward in the British royal family, but they didn't.
I was thinking Mary's Queen of Scots.
Oh no, there's a lot of cases of people who didn't go away and were problematic. Edward's only the last one who should have been king and abdicated his throne and could have been a problem, but he didn't seem to really want to be king. He didn't really seem to want to be king. So everybody assumed that, well, not everybody. There were people.
I don't know that he really wanted to be king that much.
Yeah, that's the thing. Edward didn't seem to want to. George didn't seem to really want to be king either. Didn't seem like anyone really wanted to be king. But the fact is that Edward didn't have to be killed, though it does seem from what
they don't seem to be after killing Harry, although you never know.
Exactly. Harry doesn't seem to want it either. But he's not the heir apparent. But if William didn't want it, then yes, it would assumedly would fall on him. So, but these were real issues when being a king definitely had power and meant something. So Reuben steps aside essentially for Judah And the Reubenites essentially follow suit. The whole tribe follows suit because of it. So, but Reuben did step up for his brother, just like Judah did. Reuben, to some extent, even more so than Judah, because Judah wanted to sell him. Reuben actually has the idea of keeping him alive and then coming back later. Judah just is like, let's not kill him. But Reuben really seems to say, hey, look, I'm going to get them not to kill him. I'll come back and rescue him, which is really the best thing, what he did with Joseph. So that goes back to Genesis. And the next brother, also, Shimon, goes back to Genesis too.
Just as Reuben interceded to save his brother's life, so did Shimon rise up for his sister Dinah when he took vengeance upon the inhabitants of Shechem for the wrong they had done her. Hence, the prince of the tribe of Shimon followed the prince of the tribe of Reuben. As the sanctuary was destined to punish unchastity among Israel, so were the gifts of the tribe whose sire figured as the avenger of unchastity, symbolical of the different parts of the tabernacle. The charger corresponded to the court that surrounded the tabernacle, and therefore weighed 130 shekels, to correspond to the size of the court that measured 100 cubits, of which the tabernacle occupied 30. The bowl of 70 shekels corresponded to the empty space of the tabernacle. These two, the charger and the bowl, were filled with fine flour mingled with oil, because in the court of the tabernacle were offered up the meat offerings mingled with oil, whereas in the tabernacle was the showbread of fine flour and the candlestick filled with oil. The spoon of 10 shekels of gold corresponded to the scroll of the Torah and the tables with the 10 commandments that rested in the ark. The sacrificial animals, the bullock, the ram, the lamb, and the kid, corresponded to the 4 different kinds of curtains and hangings that were used in the sanctuary, and that were fashioned out of the hides of these animals. The 2 oxen of the peace offering pointed to the 2 curtains, the one in front of the tabernacle, the other in front of the court, whereas the 3 kinds of small cattle that were used as offerings corresponded to the 3 curtains of the court, one to the north, one to the south, one to the west of it, and as each of these was 5 cubits long, so were 5 of each kind presented as offerings.
So Shimon here is given credit, good credit, for what happened to for what he did with Dinah. Because right, Shimon and Levi are the ones who go on a rampage against Shechem. So interestingly, the tribe of Shimon, we learn later on, engages in the book of Numbers in an act of unchastity during the time, or one of their members during the time of Baal Peor, which we just read about in Pinchas, the end of Balak and the beginning of Pinchas. So there is a definite irony to Shimon and his tribe. And there isn't much about Shimon besides that, either as a son or as a tribe. And so what we kind of get here are general dimensions and symbols from within the ark and the Mishkan as a whole. So it's not really anything necessarily unique to Shimon, but it is, these are things that are important for to some extent, for all the tribes. It's not really, I would say, unique to them, other than, again, this idea that somehow the tabernacle is used as a place of redeeming and sanctifying people after they've engaged in acts of unchastity. So it's kind of important for the tribes, for every tribe though, but it's for every tribe. But again, Shimon is known for that. So the next tribe, the tribe of Gad.
As Shimon, sword in hand, battled for his sister, so by force of arms did the tribe of Gad set out to gain the land beyond the Jordan for their brethren. Therefore did their prince follow Shelumiel, prince of Shimon, with his offerings. This tribe, so active in gaining the promised land, symbolized in its gifts the exodus from Egypt, which alone made possible the march of Palestine. The charger of the weight of 130 shekels alluded to Yocheved, who at the age of 130 years bore Moses, who had symbolical connection with the bowl, for he was thrown into the Nile. This bowl weighed 70 shekels as Moses extended his prophetic spirit over the 70 elders. And as the bowl was filled with fine flour, so did Moses' prophetic spirit in no way diminish because the 70 elders shared in prophecy. The 3 burnt offerings recalled the 3 virtues Israel possessed in Egypt, which were instrumental in their deliverance. They did not alter their Hebrew names, they did not alter their Hebrew language, and they lived a life of chastity. The sin offerings were to atone for the idolatry to which they were addicted in Egypt, so that God did not permit their deliverance until they had renounced idolatry. The 2 oxen of the peace offering corresponded to Jacob and Joseph, for whose sake God had delivered Israel out of Egypt. They brought, besides, 15 heads of small cattle as sacrifice, because God was mindful of his vow to the 3 patriarchs and the 12 fathers of the tribes, and released Israel out of bondage.
So the tribe of Gad, and Gad in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, we know nothing about Gad as a son of Jacob. Nothing. We don't really know much about Gad other than it's a tribe that lives outside of the land of Israel. They live in what's modern day Jordan, the other side of the Jordan River. So that's all we know about them, really. And so everything that is about their offering really is not unique to Gad. It's just other some symbolic numbers for everybody. Jacob and Joseph, or the 2 oxen. I mean, that could be for any of the tribes. The 15 heads of small cattle, which are not, again, it's a weird translation, but again, it's the rams, the lambs, the goats, the not bull, the not cattle, the small cattle they call them, but the smaller animals.
Say livestock, probably.
Yeah, livestock, exactly. I mean, that could be for any of them. The 15, what do you get? You get 3 patriarchs plus 12 tribes, but that could be anybody. That could be for any of the tribes. So the rabbis are really coming up with other numerical symbols for what each tribe offered. Each tribe on each day offered these things in the book of Numbers. But so the rabbis are deriving other numbers, other symbolic equivalents for these things. And it's especially hard when you get to some of the tribes that we really don't know that much about. The next one.
A special distinction was granted to the tribe of Ephraim, for God allowed their prince to make his offering on the Sabbath, a day on which otherwise none but the daily offerings were allowed to be offered. This distinction the tribe of Ephraim owed to its ancestor Joseph in recognition of his strict observance of the Sabbath as governor of Egypt. The gifts of this tribe represented the history of Jacob and of Joseph, for the descendants of the latter owed much to Jacob's love for his son Joseph. The charger alluded to Jacob, the bowl to Joseph. And as both these vessels were filled with fine flour mingled with oil, so too were both Jacob and Joseph very pious men, and the course of their lives ran evenly. The spoon symbolized Jacob's right hand, which he laid on the head of Ephraim to bless him. The spoon was filled with incense. Jacob laid his right hand upon Ephraim and not upon his elder brother Manasseh, because he knew that the former was worthy of the distinction. The 3 burnt offerings corresponded to the 3 patriarchs, whereas the kid of goats stood for Joseph, whose coat had been smeared with a kid's blood. The 2 oxen of the peace offering indicated the 2 blessings that the sons of Joseph had received from their grandfather Jacob, and the 3 kinds of small cattle that were offered as peace offerings corresponded to the 3 generations of Ephraim that Joseph was permitted to see before his death.
So we know a little bit more about Ephraim in the Bible. Not a lot, other than we're told that Joseph got to see his great-great-grandchildren through Ephraim, which would, by the way, roughly take them to just about the time of leaving Egypt. I mean, just before. But so the Bible does say that in Genesis. But of course, Ephraim being Joseph's son and the one that essentially gets the blessing, even though his older brother Manasseh was supposed to get the blessing, when Jacob blesses Ephraim instead with his right arm, with his right hand, switches his hands around, and Joseph says, "Don't do that, Dad." And Jacob says, "I know what I'm doing." This, of course, is significant for Ephraim, being one of the most powerful tribes during the time of the up until the time of King David. Very powerful tribe. So Ephraim is definitely a powerful tribe. The Bible knows that they're a powerful tribe. And Joseph is obviously a significant ancestor. So, Ephraim gets some special credit for that. And because of it is the offering that's done on the 7th day, the day of Shabbat. So when we come back around to the offerings on that day, it would be Ephraim that would have been on the 7th day. 6 tribes before that, and now the 7th tribe being Ephraim. That's not it. It's not it for Ephraim and Joseph's, or I should say for Joseph's house. Here we go.
Joseph not only observed the Sabbath, he was also chaste, not to be tempted by Potiphar's wife, and he was faithful in the service of his master. God therefore said to Joseph, "You have kept the 7th commandment, you shall not commit adultery, and have not committed adultery with Potiphar's wife. And you have also kept the following commandment, the 8th, you shall not steal, for you stole neither Potiphar's money nor his conjugal happiness. Hence there will come a time when I will give thee the reward due you. When hereafter the princes of the tribes will offer their offerings at the dedication of the altar, the 2 princes among your descendants shall one after the other offer their offerings, the one on the 7th, the other on the 8th day of the dedication, as a reward, because you observed the 7th and the 8th commandments." The prince of the tribe of Manasseh now followed that of Ephraim, trying, like the precedings, symbolically, to represent Jacob's and Joseph's lives. The charger, 130 shekels in weight, indicated that Jacob, at the age of 130 years, migrated to Egypt for the sake of Joseph. The bowl of 70 shekels corresponded to Joseph, who caused 70 souls of the Hebrews to migrate to Egypt. The spoon of 10 shekels of gold indicated the 10 portions of land that fell to Manasseh. The 3 burnt offerings corresponded to the 3 generations of Manasseh that Joseph was permitted to see before his death, whereas the kid of the goats recalled Yair, son of Manasseh, who died childless. The 2 oxen of the peace offering indicated that the possessions of the tribe of Manasseh were to be divided into 2 parts, one on this side of the Jordan and one beyond it. The 3 kinds of small cattle for peace offerings corresponded to the triple attempt of Joseph to influence his father in favor of Manasseh, whereas the 5 head of each indicated the 5 daughters of Zelophehad, the only women who, like men, received their shares in the distribution of the promised land.
Yep. And so here we get to Manasseh, who is the other son of Joseph, not the more powerful one or the most, again, significant of the tribes. But we learn a little bit about Manasseh, the tribe, in that half the tribe is in the land of Israel on the side of the Jordan River that is Israel. And another half of the tribe, the other half, is with Gad on the other side of the Jordan River. So that we derive some things from what we know about Manasseh and the Torah. Yeah. And we also read about Yair, a son of Manasseh, who doesn't have kids. We also read that Manasseh also had 10 sons, which is why there's 10 portions of land that go to the Manassites. Manasseh is an important tribe. We don't know that much about it, but we know enough, and it's also, of course, connected to Joseph. So it's an important tribe from that standpoint. Again, we have this midrash that Jacob was, based on the symbolism, Jacob was 130 years old when he went down to Egypt, which meant he spent the last 40 years or so of his life in Egypt. These are all parts of what we derive from Manasseh. But the other thing is that because he's the other son of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh are the 2 sons of Joseph, Jacob's grandchildren that he blesses and elevates to the line of tribes. Remember, because essentially the tribe of Manasseh is elevated to where the Levites are, where the Levites don't get a land holding in the land of Israel. Joseph's 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, Ephraim would get the one that essentially would be Joseph's, and Manasseh gets the tribe of Levi, of the Levites. So that's how we get 12 tribal portions, if you will, even though we essentially would be left with 13 tribes, because the Levites would have had, they would have been there too. But it's kind of an explanation for why we have like 12 tribes, but also in some ways 13 tribes. And so the Manassites are kind of a representation of the double portion that Joseph got. And so the offering that he brings is kind of representative of that. Again, some of it, you could argue, isn't just Joseph or just Manasseh, though they say that the 70 people who came down to Egypt, that's Joseph caused that to happen. And so it was fitting that it represents one of Joseph's kids, Ephraim or Manasseh. But also, again, this idea that the 7th and 8th commandments are representative of Joseph, because Joseph didn't commit adultery. It didn't steal. Now, you can make the argument he wasn't going to steal from Potiphar. He was going to sleep with his wife, which would have been adultery, but he also didn't steal from him when he had easy access to everything that was Potiphar's. He didn't steal. Again, it's a little less obvious than the adultery part, but yet Ephraim and Manasseh represent Joseph's not breaking the seventh and eighth commandments. Okay, it's kind of an interesting little meditation on the commandments and on Joseph. Next, we get to the third of that third section, the Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin section. This is tribes. These are tribes 7, 8, and 9, the third section. So let's read about Benjamin's offering.
As the sanctuary stood first in Shiloh, Joseph's possession, then in Jerusalem, Benjamin's possession, so did this tribe with its sacrifices follow Joseph's tribes. The charger signified Rachel, the mother of Benjamin, who bore him to Jacob when he was 100 years old, and in memory of this, as well as of Benjamin's attainment of 30 years when he came to Egypt, the weight of the charger amounted to 130 shekels. The bowl indicated the cup Joseph employed to discover his brother's sentiments toward Benjamin, and both vessels, charger and cup, were filled with fine flour, for both Joseph's and Benjamin's lands were found worthy of being cited for God's sanctuary. The spoon of 10 shekels of gold full of incense corresponded to the 10 sons of Benjamin, all of whom were pious men. The 3 burnt offerings corresponded to the 3 temples erected in Jerusalem: Benjamin's property, the Temple of Solomon, the Temple of the exiles returned from Babylon, and the Temple to be erected by the Messiah. The sin offering, the kid of the goats, points to the building of the temple by the wicked King Herod, who atoned for his execution of the learned men by the erection of the sanctuary. The 2 oxen of the peace offering corresponded to the 2 deliverers of the Jews that sprang from the tribe of Benjamin, Mordecai and Esther. The 5 heads of each of the 3 kinds of small cattle for a peace offering symbolized the triple distinction of Benjamin and his tribe by 5 gifts. The gift of honor that Joseph gave his brother Benjamin 5 times exceeded that of all his other brothers. When Joseph made himself known to his brothers, he gave Benjamin 5 changes of raiment, and so too did the Benjaminite Mordecai receive from Ahasuerus 5 garments of state.
So that's the tribe of Benjamin, which again, we don't know a lot about Benjamin in the Bible. We know that he's the youngest son. He's the one that Joseph tries to set up to rescue or to get away from the rest of the brothers. Then he sees how the brothers protect Benjamin. And we know, of course, that Jerusalem is in the area, in the tribal portion of Benjamin. Small tribe, it's a small territory, yet it's a very important territory. As we mentioned several times, it's kind of the equivalent of Washington, D.C., Benjamin, and that is right in the center of the country. But if you take Benjamin, and then Ephraim and Manasseh, those tribes, it's the heartland of ancient Israel, biblical Israel. So it is a very important area, which is one of the representations or symbols of the offering. But they also say that the 3 offerings also correspond, as you see here, to the 3 temples. The first being the first temple of Solomon, the second temple, which was the one destroyed by the Romans, the one built by the exiles who returned from Babylon 70 years later after the first one, which existed again for 500 years. And then the third temple, which hasn't been built yet, be never destroyed. So it's essentially setting up, of course, this idea that that temple erected by the Messiah can never be destroyed. It's not like any of the other temples that was there for a certain period of time. I mean, the first temple essentially was there for 500 years, which is a really long time. The second temple essentially was there for roughly about 500 years as well. The next temple is going to be there for a lot longer. It's going to be there forever. So what's interesting about this is that the rabbis also point out here something you don't see a lot, which is a recognition of King Herod. King Herod essentially rebuilt the temple from the ground up. And the rabbis know that. They also know that he's a bad dude, really all around bad guy. But they also know that he did something really special, which is that he rebuilt the temple. He didn't have to rebuild the temple. The temple was already there. It's not like he built it up after it was destroyed. It was there. It was the second temple, the temple that was built during the time of the return from exile, about 500 BCE. And at least according to the rabbis and the firsthand witnesses to that second temple, they didn't feel it was as holy as the first temple. And at least the temple that existed there up to the King Herod's time, including during the time of the Maccabees, the Hasmoneans, isn't as opulent, isn't as grand as some people felt it should be. Definitely King Herod didn't feel it was up to par, which is why he rebuilt it. He spent a lot of time and a lot of money making that temple. And he wanted it to be on par with temples that you saw throughout the Roman Empire. As a matter of fact, according to what we know from the rabbis and kind of the contemporary sources like Josephus, who saw this temple, who prayed in this temple, it was the most impressive temple in the world. Not the Greek world, the whatever, the world. Like there was no temple like the temple in Jerusalem. Whereas King Herod essentially said, look, the Jewish people are going to be the people known for knowing how to pray. You're going to build a building for the people who know how to pray. It's going to be our temple. Look, the Romans had lots of temples. They had a temple to Zeus, they had Jupiter, they had a temple to Diana, they had lots of temples. You know, Neptune had a temple. Everybody's got a temple. We got one temple for one God. Let's make it really, really impressive. And that's what King Herod seems as his logic was to it. Of course, he was a murderous thug. And so what we're left with is the rabbis recognizing he's a murderous thug, but he did build a really impressive temple. Some people even called it the third temple because it was so different and so much more opulent than what existed on that space before it. He literally rebuilt, he built it from the ground up. And when we go to the Wailing Wall today, we are standing at stones that were laid by King Herod's workers, not the workers of the first temple or second temple, first temple, second temple. It's Herod's temple. So you can imagine how impressive the temple was when the outer wall of the retaining wall of the temple was as magnificent as it is. People in the Roman Empire built really impressive things. They built the Colosseum. They built really great things. King Herod's goal was to build a temple that would make Jerusalem a place where everyone else in the world would say, you know where the greatest temple is to any god? It's in Jerusalem. That's what it seems that Herod really wanted to do. And the rabbis have to acknowledge that he was successful at doing that. So this is a very strange and rare time where the rabbis recognize King Herod. And of course, we also have a very important thing about Benjamin, that he is the ancestor of Mordecai and Esther. And so as the ancestor to these very righteous people, man and woman, Esther and Mordecai and Esther, we recognize that Benjamin gets credit for those people as well. So not only does he get credit for Jerusalem, he gets credit for Mordecai and Esther later on. And so his oxen, essentially his two oxen, represent those two really special people from the tribe of Benjamin. All right. So now we get to the last quadrant, the last quarter, the last three tribes. Here we go.
In his blessing, Jacob likened Dan to Judah. Hence, the tribe of Dan stood at the head of the fourth camp of Israel, and their prince offered his gifts before those of Asher and Naphtali. Jacob, in his blessing to Dan, thought principally of the great hero Samson. Hence, the gifts of this tribe allude chiefly to the story of this Danite judge. Samson was a Nazirite, and to this alluded the silver charger for storing bread, for it is the duty of a Nazirite at the expiration of the period of his vow to present bread as an offering. To Samson, too, alluded the bull, in Hebrew called mitrag, creeping, for he was lame of both feet and hence could only creep and crawl. The spoon of 10 shekels of gold recalled the 10 laws that are imposed upon Nazirites and that Samson had to obey. The 3 burnt offerings had a similar significance, for Samson's mother received 3 injunctions from the angel, who said to her husband Manoah, "She may not eat of anything that comes from the vine, neither let her drink wine or strong drink, nor eat any unclean thing." The sin offering, which consisted of a kid called in Hebrew Sa'ir, corresponded to the admonition given to Samson's mother not to shave his hair, in Hebrew Se'ar. The 2 oxen corresponded to the 2 pillars of which Samson took hold to demolish the house of the Philistines, whereas the 3 kinds of small cattle that were presented as offerings symbolized the 3 battles that Samson undertook against the Philistines.
Yep. And we don't know much about the tribe of Dan. We really don't. I mean, we don't know much about them. We actually really don't know much about these last 3 tribes, Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. But we do know that Samson was a Danite, and he's pretty important in the sense that we got a really long story about him in the book of Judges. It's a story that a lot of people know even today. It's a pretty dramatic and impressive story just in the Bible. But the Midrash, we've read the Midrash a long time ago on Samson. It's even more astounding, some of the things that we learn about Shimshon, Samson. We know that, at least according to the Midrash, and it seems to be kind of given in the Torah, that Samson didn't look strong. I mean, kind of, that's part of what makes it so wild, is that he's not somebody that you think is going to be strong. That's part of what makes him so miraculous, is that he doesn't look strong. His strength comes from God. The fact that he doesn't cut his hair and it follows the rules of the Nazarites, which again, not to drink, not to cut your hair. And that's where he gets the strength. The Midrash goes even further, which is that he was literally differently abled, I think is the proper term, that he is essentially not able to walk normally, which makes what he does even more dramatic and amazing. Does everybody get that? I mean, so Samson is tremendously miraculous in the Midrash. It goes even further. So the Midrash on the Danites is really a Midrash more on Samson more than anything else, because we really don't know anything else about Dan other than the Danites are known as a tribe of judges. The word Dan means to judge. So that we have from the tribe of Dan, which seems to be connected to the next tribe, the Asherites.
The judge must pronounce judgment before it is executed. Hence, to the tribe of Asher, the executors of justice, followed Dan, the judges. The name Asher also signifies good fortune, referring to the good fortune of, can we Get that over the
Sorry.
right weeks. The good fortune of Israel that was chosen to be God's people. And in accordance with this name, also do the gifts of the prince of the tribe of Asher allude to the distinction of Israel. The charger, 130 shekels of silver in weight, corresponds to the nations of the world, whom, however, God repudiated, choosing Israel in their stead. The bowl of 70 shekels corresponds to the 70 pious souls of whom Israel consisted when they moved to Egypt. Both vessels were filled with fine flour. God sent his prophets to the other nations as well as to Israel, but Israel alone declared itself willing to accept the Torah. This nation accepted the spoon of 10 shekels of gold filled with incense, every man among them being willing to accept the 10 commandments and the Torah. The 3 burnt offerings corresponded to the 3 crowns that Israel received from their God: the crown of the Torah, the crown of the priesthood, and the crown of the kingdom, for which reason also golden crowns were fashioned on the ark in which the Torah was kept, on the altar on which the priests offered sacrifices, and on the table that symbolized the kingdom. But the highest of all is the crown of a good name, which a man earns through good deeds. For the crucial test is not the study of the Torah, but the life conforming to it. For this reason also there was a sin offering among the offerings, corresponding to the crown of good deeds, for these alone can serve as an expiation. The 2 oxen indicate the 2 Torah that God gave his people, the written and the oral, whereas the 15 peace offerings of small cattle corresponded to the 3 patriarchs and the 12 fathers of the tribes. For these 15 God had chosen.
Yeah, and that one's actually repeated. We actually read that already. So that one, they didn't even come up with a new one. But really, as you see, for the tribe of Asher, there's nothing unique to Asher because we don't know anything about Asher. And so every one of these things essentially is for every one of the tribes, everybody in Israel. There's nothing here that is unique to Asher. There's a little midrash here that the name Asher means, essentially good fortune, blessed, good things. It's what the word Asher means. Osher or Asher, the Hebrew name, very popular Hebrew Yiddish name for a long time, Asher. Not so much today, but up to, and still in the Orthodox world, Asher is not an uncommon, I would say, name, but not so much in the non-Orthodox world.
You and Asher growing up.
Yeah, there still were Ashers. I mean, there still were Ashers,
Of course, that was a long time ago.
Didn't say that, but Asher was a pretty legit Hebrew name. I'm trying to think about I don't think in 21 years at Temple Beth Ami, could be wrong, but I don't think I've had an Asher. But it was a very common Oisher or Asher. It's a very common Oisher in Yiddish, but it was a really common name, and it's a great name. It means good fortune, blessed, good things. But again, these could be for any of the tribes. But again, this is why crowns are such a symbol that we use around the Torah, putting crowns on a Torah. Torah crowns, a keter that goes on the throne, on the Torah. There's also, crown images or crowns sewn into the mantles for the Torah. Again, the crown of Torah is one of those. So the crown of the priesthood, also the crown of the obvious one, the crown of kingship. Those are considered to be the crowns of Jewish tradition. But we also have this tradition the rabbis give us is that the greatest crown is actually a 4th crown, the crown of a good name. We call it Baal Shem Tov, the owner of a good name, which is considered to be the best crown, which is, again, your reputation, the knowledge of the things that you do. not the things that you own, the things that you learned, your degrees, if you will, but what type of reputation you have from the things that you do, which is good deeds. And the rabbis essentially are saying, it's not, this is the great part of this midrash here. It's not your Torah knowledge that matters. It's whether you actually live it. Because the good deeds, that's what is going to help you. That's what actually is going to make the world a better place. That's the thing that's actually going to get you forgiveness, not your knowledge of things. Not that you know what you're supposed to do, but that you actually do it. And when you don't do it, you get credit for it to some extent. We all make mistakes. What gets us forgiveness is not the fact that we know lots of stuff, we knew what we were supposed to do, but that most of the time we do the right thing. That's kind of a pretty important idea that Judaism teaches us, that for all that Torah knowledge is important, it's not as important as actually living a life of good deeds. All right. Finally, get to Naphtali.
As Jacob blessed after Asher and the Naphtali, so did these two tribes succeed each other in the offerings at the dedication of the tabernacle. Naphtali, Jacob's son, was a very affectionate son who was ever ready to execute his father's every command. The prince of the tribe of Naphtali followed his ancestors' example, and by his gifts to the sanctuary sought to recall the three patriarchs and their wives. One silver charger, the weight whereof was 130 shekels, symbolized Sarah, who was unique among her sex in her piety and who almost attained the age of 130 years. A silver bowl for sprinkling blood recalled Abraham, who was thrown far away from his home. The weight of the bowl was 70 shekels, as Abraham also was 70 years old when God made with him the covenant between the pieces. The charger and the bowl were both filled with fine flour mingled with oil, as also Abraham and Sarah were imbued with a love for good and pious deeds. The spoon of 10 shekels of gold alludes to Abraham as well, for Abraham conquered the evil inclination and resisted the 10 temptations, whereas the 3 burnt offerings and the sin offering correspond to the offerings made by Abraham at the covenant between the pieces. The 2 oxen for the peace offering indicate Isaac and Rebekah, whereas the 3 kinds of small cattle allude to Jacob, Leah, and Rachel. But the sum total of the offerings of these 3 species was 15, corresponding to these 3 and the 12 fathers of the tribes.
Yep. So Naphtali is even, I don't know if it's less, but there's nothing significant about Naphtali that we get other than it says that he's an affectionate son, which doesn't really say that in the Bible, but this idea that Naphtali was there for his father and did everything his father said is an interesting idea, in one that is I
think you froze.
well,
Welcome back.
it just ended, and guess what? That was very weird timing, because that is exactly where we're going to end today. So I want to thank Rosemary for jumping on, and my phone somehow died right at that moment. I mean, my computer died exactly at that moment. I don't know why. Now it came back on, but anyways, saying my screen is being observed. I don't understand. Anyways, I want to thank everybody for being a part of this. We got to read a little bit about the tribes, and I don't know why now it came back on. Well, anyways, everybody, please stay healthy and stay good. We have services this Friday live, 8 o'clock. So join us if you can, and tomorrow night for our Torah study. So again, thank you everybody for being here, and thank you, Rosemary, for jumping on and helping us while we were there. All right, everybody, take care.
Have a good week.
We'll see you. Take care. Bye-bye, everybody.